John Stephen Gygax. Now, we touched upon Gygax in the previous episode, although that was focused mostly on Helgoth and other suspects in the Pew Crew theory, which may or may not also include John Stephen Gygax, and we will be taking a look at Gygax and all things connected to Gygax and other parties not discussed anywhere else in this case, in the mainstream media at least, in what is the most comprehensive Jonbenet Ramsey podcast series, Mindshock. So let's break this down first from acandyrose.com, which is a very, very in-depth website referring to all available evidence in the Jonbenet Ramsey case. Speculate about the viability of suspects. Who killed the pageant queen, the prime suspect, shown in the UK on Real Crime ITV 1 on June 15, 2004. This was produced by Michael Tracy and co-produced with David Mills. Suspects targeted by Michael Tracy in his documentaries: Michael Helgoth and John Stephen Gygax. Targeted as Helgoth's partner in crime and then Helgoth's killer. Of course, the suicide by many considered staged. Michael Helgoth's DNA doesn't match. And again, these are all old articles, old write-ups, old documentaries. The latest DNA technology has not been used to rule out any suspects. Now, obviously, one or two generation old DNA tech is not going to be as accurate as modern tech. Now, that still doesn't mean the most modern technology is accurate. Supposedly, there's only enough of a sample to test one more time. Now, in 2022, I don't know why they can't duplicate the sample somehow in order to be able to have something to test later as well. But that's law enforcement for you. So just continuing on here, it says the DNA doesn't match, but again, that's not 100% certain with such a degraded sample. John Gygax contacted the Boulder DA's office when he discovered Michael Tracy was targeting him. He provided documentation that he wasn't in Boulder on December 25th, 1996. Michael Tracy is quoted in Rocky Mountain News, September 2nd, 2006, as, quote, "Nor did he do what he has criticized the media for over the years, speculate about the viability of suspects," end quote. What? Both Michael Helgoth and John Stephen Gygax are presumed innocent, just as John Mark Carr was presumed innocent. And for Michael Tracy to continue to feature these men on his prime suspects, whether in his own documentaries or in court TV specials he co-produces, or the selling of sections of his show to other networks, whether here in the USA or abroad, is proving he is nothing more than a hypocrite and doing the exact same thing that he's claiming he is fighting against: media trial in the court of public opinion. In a legal deposition in the Wolf vs. Ramsey civil suit dated December 11, 2001, Patsy Ramsey stated on page 158, quote, "I mean, we are not afraid to face even our most vile opponent, of which I consider the National Enquirer to be one of the most vile," end quote. Michael Tracy appeared on Catherine Cryer Live, Court TV, June 24, 2004, and validates using Michael Helgoth and then covertly using John Gygax as the prime suspect in his documentary from a story published in the National Enquirer that Helgoth had a stun gun and owned high-tech boots, shown in the segment. Tracy praises the National Enquirer for running the story, while at the same time his documentaries are peppered with criticism on tabloid articles, including those in the National Enquirer for attacking the Ramsey. I mean, you could approve of some things an entity does and not other things. I mean, I don't know how hypocritical that is, but... So let's get even more in depth. On the Jonbenet subreddit, just 5 months or so ago, in 2022, Hope Troll posted this regarding John Stephen Gygax, referencing Geraldo at-large interview of John Stephen Gygax and observations here. It is a transcript, so some of the issues could be due to transcription errors. 1. Gygax says he has receipts from a Sears to prove he was in Indiana at the time of Jonbenet's killing, but as far as I know, the Indiana Sears wasn't open on Christmas Day in 1996. Also, since he has roommates, wouldn't it make more sense to say my roommates can vouch for me that I was living in Indiana at the time? 2. He says he lived in Boulder for 15 years until he moved to Indiana in September, October of 96. 3. He also says that he heard about the killing of Jonbenet in September, October of 96. Although incorrect, indicates he moved to Indiana at the same time as Jonbenet's killing. Or at the same time that he thought it was. So he doesn't even know the months here. 4. If he were innocent, why wouldn't he take a DNA test and then sue the documentarian Michael Tracy? I realize he might not want to be implicated in a separate crime, which is why he wouldn't give DNA. That's an interesting point there, especially if he's a known criminal. 5. Lastly, he did automotive restoration work, which might explain why he might have black specialty duct tape on hand. SureTape sells a black duct tape designed to be used on cars. And we don't need to go down the SureTape rabbit holes here, but apparently it was manufactured. To be able to get it, there's questions on how quickly one can get it if it was manufactured so close to the date, and it would have to have been shipped, etc., etc. You can look at our previous podcast regarding the SureTape and Susan Bennett and all of the coincidences in that direction. 6. He has trailers and he caravans. A good reason to own olefin utility cord. One of the uses for that cord was for tents. Due to caravanning, he probably is familiar with the knots used for camping. 7. He claims Michael Helgoth was just a work friend, but check out his response when asked about what happened to Michael. So he's asked what happened to Michael. Gygax says this, quote, well, when I was back, after I moved back there in Indiana in September or October, I don't have the exact date. I know it was toward the end of September or the beginning of October 96. I was living my life, and of course I saw the news release of the Jonbenet murder in Boulder. I was in Bloomington, Indiana, in a home that I was renting with 2 other roommates. We were sitting there watching TV that evening when it broke, and one of my Richard Hill, who is from Boulder, I'm assuming that one of my roommates, who's Richard Hill, who is from Boulder, he came back with me to Indiana from Boulder, who helped me drive some of the vehicles. I had a big rental truck pulling the trailer, the Jeep, and my 55 Chevy pickup truck pulling a trailer. So he drove the pickup truck, and we caravanned out here together. I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. So that's his answer when asked what happened to Michael. Okay, the commentary here continues. I realize he might have just been nervous, but this seems like an easy yes, I heard about that. It is very sad. He's a nice guy. He didn't say it better later, as shown below. He's asked, the end of Michael Helgoth's life, because this is important here. Gygax says, quote, Michael, according to what I've been told, committed suicide on February 14th, 97. Okay, point 7, a Dirty Harry reference. He's asked, now I want to tell people how the true investigators find out that this man being named by so, actually I want to make it so your story, there's a frame where they hold up what they claim to be a police report, correct? Gygax responds, quote, yes, it was a menacing with a deadly weapon charge that I just spoke about earlier in the show where a fight broke out in my mobile home and my roommate was being injured and I interviewed and got a little bit, I'm assuming that should be intervened, and I got a little bit carried away and pinpricked a guy in his chest with a knife, and he reached his hand up and grabbed the knife blade, and when I pulled it back, he cut his hand, but I was just trying to get him out the door away from my roommate so I can tend to my roommate, who ended up actually having an amputated finger from the incident from the guy I was trying to protect him from. If you were to get a hold of the courtroom transcripts, the prosecutor spoke to the judge on my behalf, actually more so than my own lawyer had to talk. He told the judge that I was so close to making my day thing that I probably shouldn't be even in the courtroom. But because we were all drunk, it was New Year's Eve night. Basically, one person's testimony cancels out another, so all were inadmissible. So basically, it was my word against the injured party's word, and that was it. Point 8. Lastly, although he has an aw-shuckish vernacular, he can be quite elegant and targeted when he wants to be. This might have been written for him, though. Quote, I would just like to say I'd like to see Michael Tracy held accountable for what he's done to me and others. Also, Michael Tracy is a journalism professor at the Colorado University, which is one of our nation's most respected universities, and I just think that the CU faculty, students, alumni, and those donating money in grants to the Colorado University really want the university to be associated with the professor that works this way. or don't want to? Do the parents of students attending CU for journalism degrees really want a man like Michael Tracy teaching their children? I ask anyone hearing this show to think what this would do to your life. Imagine having your family, friends, coworkers having to live this nightmare. Then understand that next week it could be you in Michael Tracy's sights. This man needs to be stopped before he ruins another life. I'm asking the public for help. If this upsets you, please write to Colorado University Board of Regents and voice your opinion to them. I would like to see Michael Tracy removed from his teaching position at Colorado University and issue a public apology for his wrongful accusations leveled against myself and others. This man has no business teaching in a university, period, and that's just what I wanted to say, end quote. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting shift. That's an interesting shift in dialogue. So in September, October 96, Gygax had just served 90 days for the felony of menacing with a deadly weapon. And then he moves to Indiana allegedly right after. But he also doesn't seem to have a good memory because he claims he heard about Jonbenet Ramsey's death in September, October 96. 43 Holding responded with this: Gygax is not named in the clip of the documentary Who Killed the Pageant Queen, other than to state that he was Helgoth's associate. In this, it mentions that he may have worked in the Ramsey home before they moved in. Unidentified animal hairs were found in the basement near Jonbenet's body. Helgoth's associate, aka Gygax, raised wolf dogs whose hair matched those colors. Edited to add that there are some errors in the clip, one of which they state the age of the Boulder girl referred to as Amy as being 12 years old and others she was 14, is the comment about Patsy's health insurance towards the end.
These detectives did not see Helgoth as the actual killer. In fact, DNA samples taken at a post-mortem show that he was not. But they think he may have been involved. One reason is that they've always believed it likely that more than one person was in the Ramsey home that night. The footprints suggest this, as do the number of objects taken in and out of the house. These include a rope, stun gun, cord, and duct tape. It would have been difficult for just one person to have done everything that was done that night. And the ransom note also suggests that more than one person was involved. It says, "We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction." It warns about the two gentlemen watching over your daughter. Throughout, it refers to the kidnappers in the plural. The new team of detectives think Helgoth may well have been involved as an accomplice of an even more deadly killer. One who later murdered him to stop him talking after Alex Hunter's unnerving press conference. In trying to identify a potential killer, they came up with an important clue. In the months before the murder, up to a dozen homes near the Ramseys were broken into at night. There was a curious pattern to these burglaries. Little or nothing was taken. Detectives believed they were carried out simply for the thrill of stalking others at night. The break-ins stopped abruptly after the murder. The Boulder police did not link them to the murder, but the new investigators believed they might be the key to everything. Because Helgoth, too, used to stalk people at night. It happened to John Kennedy.
I was working on a car late one evening in my garage. I kind of get the feeling there's something out there, and went right up to the window to look. I looked and it was real quiet. I don't see anything. I looked again, and all I could see were a pair of eyes coming out of the black. I don't know why I figured, well, this could be Michael. So I said, "Is that you, Mike?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, how long you been out there?" And he goes, "Long enough." And he's gone. I thought it was kind of strange.
Helgoth used to stalk people at night, dressed in black ninja clothing. When looking for his possible killer, detectives looked for a violent associate who shared his interest in martial arts and young girls. They immediately came up with one, a close associate who has since disappeared, a man who frightens those around him.
I tried to steer clear of that individual because he could have been, a menace to me or my family.
Were you personally scared of him?
On a level, I'd have to say yes. Absolutely. I think he was capable of being violent towards anybody.
Threatened to cut one of his girlfriend's ears off. His ex-wife, he tried to kill her. They were only married probably 5-6 days.
Helgoth's associate lived in this trailer park near the car salvage yard. The makers of this program know his name, but have decided to withhold it because he has not been charged with any offense. But the more that has been discovered about him, the more he fits the profile of a stalker and a killer.
He was very methodical. He wanted everything down to the last detail. He didn't want anybody else to have any control. If he didn't feel like he was controlling a situation, he would lash out.
Martial arts, he liked those throwing knives, he was into ninja, he was into dark clothing. He always wore a black t-shirt, black pants, black boots.
Helgoth's associate was convicted following a stabbing here on the trailer park. Witnesses were too frightened to give evidence, but court documents summarized his criminal record as violence, history of sexual assault. They also reveal that he was a convicted pedophile. He was imprisoned in the 1980s for a sexual assault on a child. It is believed that he may have worked in the Ramsey home shortly before the family moved in. Unidentified animal hairs were found in the cellar where Jonbenet's body was left. The hairs were of two colors. Helgoth's associate raised wolf dogs whose hairs exactly match those colors. Helgoth had bought 2 of these dogs.
If Michael Helgoth and this one associate that we identified were actually involved in the burglaries, they could have easily been involved in the murder also. There was just too many associated items that could tie him to it. That means that he has to be eliminated. We need DNA from him, wherever he might be.
These investigators see the associate as their prime suspect in the Ramsey case. Tracking him down, they say, is a priority. The need to do so made more urgent by revelations about another horrific crime the Ramsey killer may have committed. Seven years after the murder of Jonbenet Ramsey, a prime suspect has been identified for the killing. He's been identified by new investigators, who have also uncovered disturbing facts about another crime he may have committed. It occurred in an affluent area of Boulder, near the Ramsey home, just 9 months after the killing of Jonbenet. A mother and her 12-year-old daughter returned to their home here after a visit to the cinema. The girl attended the same dance studio in Boulder as Jonbenet. The Dance West studio is now derelict and about to be pulled down. But detectives think the fact that the girl danced here might explain what happened that night. Her father was away on business. When the girl and her mother returned home, they were alone. They are still too upset to talk publicly about what happened next. There was an intruder in their home. The father is anxious to protect the family's identity.
My feeling is he got into the house while they were out and hid inside the house.
After turning on the burglar alarm, the mother went to bed. Sometime later, the intruder crept into the girl's bedroom. He put his hand over her mouth. He used her name and told her he knew her. He began a sexual assault and a possible abduction. But the mother close by was a light sleeper.
My wife heard whispering. She got up, asked if everything was okay. She got a non-committal reply. Thought that there might be someone moving around. She took a can of mace and walked into the other bedroom. And that's when she saw a man there. He ran past her and ran out a bedroom window where he had to jump off the roof.
It was what he was wearing, though, which has intrigued detectives.
He was dressed completely in black from head to foot, like a ninja.
His mask was pulled up. But detectives say the black clothing strengthens their belief that this case may be linked to the Ramsey murder.
And what we found is that there were a lot of similarities between the Dance West case and the Ramsey case. So we have a little girl who was in her room right next to her mom and dad. There was an alarm system that was not activated. Somebody entered the home. Somebody assaulted this little girl and then left.
I suggested multiple times that the case seemed very similar to the Ramsey case. When I told the police detectives about this, they said, no, this has no similarity at all.
Frustrated by the attitude of the Boulder police, the parents hired a private detective. He uncovered the same pattern of late-night break-ins that have now caught the attention of detectives investigating the Ramsey murder.
We learned about a series of intrusions and attempted assaults where someone would come home and find someone in their bedroom in the middle of the night, or someone appeared in someone's bedroom in the middle of the night. To me, it's so similar that you'd have to think there's a very good chance that it was the same person, or it may just be that there's a number of lowlives running around. Whether they know each other or not, who knows? The similarities are pretty compelling, though, and it seems to me if you were the police, you'd at least be curious about it, rather than not wanting to hear about it.
They would just enter the home in a ninja costume.
All dressed in black.
The detectives now hunting Jonbenet's killer are shocked that the lead was ignored.
The fact that Boulder PD ignored information was just absolutely ludicrous. Why are you not taking this information and seeing if it was related to the Ramsey case? You have an obligation as a law enforcement agency to take these facts and either eliminate it or say, guess what? It is part of the Ramsey homicide.
While dismissing any link to the Ramsey case, the Boulder police dismayed the parents by questioning their daughter's school friends. In the process, revealing what had happened to her, something she wanted kept secret.
If I had to rate the police performance in this case on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd rate it a -10. Because it was not only incompetent and dishonest in that they would tell us they were doing things that they didn't do. Not only that, but it caused additional harm to a victim.
In the Dance West case, the victim alerts mom and is able to get up and leave.
These detectives believe, had the mother not awoken and disturbed the intruder, it could have gone badly for her too. The parents are only too aware of this.
The possibility that it could have turned out the same way is pretty obvious, and then you'd have the police saying, well, it's clear that the parent must have done it, because nobody else could get in there. But for my wife being a light sleeper, we might be in the newspapers now, as well as the Ramseys.
So, supposedly according to this documentary, he allegedly worked in the Ramsey home, but before they moved in. But either way, before and during the Ramsey stay at that house, how many convicts, ex-convicts, criminals worked in that house? It seems to be a laundry list. And this guy also convicted in the 80s of a crime against a child as well. I mean, this is crazy. And then, of course, according to this documentary, they're linking Gygax to being the ninja-like guy who possibly was responsible for the other assault within 7 months of the Jonbenet Ramsey death, which is curious. We've gone over that before, because there's a lot of coincidence theorists out there who think that for some reason a criminal-minded individual would never lie in wait at a house until people came home, when the exact same thing happened in the exact same town to a girl who went to the same dance studio as Jonbenet. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, people. So, there's somebody in that neighborhood who's doing these things. And then if Gygax and Helgoth are obsessed with ninjas and breaking into houses, I mean, this is all very, very strange, to say the least. It is very, very strange. Now, in the previous episode, we went over Lorraine Florence, the housekeeper's daughter, the daughter of one of the Ramseys' previous housekeepers, Geraldine Vodica, in something that for whatever reason is not discussed. This is very, very curious. Because Boulder, again, Hope Troll posted this interesting write-up. In the first 338 days of 1996, Boulder, Colorado had 0 murders. In the following 72 days, Boulder, Colorado experienced 3 mysterious deaths/murders, if Helgoth was a murder. Some people believe that Lorraine Florence was some kind of accidental death as well. But theoretically, Jonbenet Ramsey could have also been accidental, depending on which theory one subscribes to. And this is weird, though, because we have this triangle of 3 deaths in an area where there are usually 0 deaths. All 3 people were young. All 3 people experienced slow, agonizing deaths. 2 women were murdered between midnight and 2 a.m. Lorraine Florence was the daughter of one of the Ramseys' previous maids, Geraldine Vodica. Okay, this is really weird. Another post by Hope Patrol here. Apparently the cocaine in Lorraine's system had been ingested. I'm wondering if the MO for the first Lorraine cocaine and the last Michael Helgoth sedatives murders was to drug the victims and then kill them in a non-obvious way. An interesting question and explanation here. What is Helgoth's connection? Because these aren't coincidences. Hope Troll responded, someone who knew Helgoth is responsible for all this and framed Helgoth for what happened to Jonbenet. Why did they frame him instead of anyone else? The mastermind needed to frame someone, and Helgoth was in his social sphere. Helgoth was likely young and trusting. The mastermind was older, manipulative, and vicious. Helgoth had taken out a permanent restraining order on his ex-girlfriend, so although he was a big talker, he might have been a softie. The mastermind may have heard that Helgoth vaguely talked to John Kennedy about the deal and didn't want to commit this crime with Helgoth anymore since Helgoth couldn't be discreet. Alternately, Helgoth realized that their plan made no sense and that they wouldn't get a ransom, so Helgoth no longer wanted to be involved. I don't think Helgoth was involved, but I think he knew things, and that made him a threat to whoever did this. If you are trying to plan the perfect crime, doesn't it make sense to have the perfect fall guy? Huh. God's Warrior 89 asked if there was anything that linked Michael Helgoth to the Ramseys. Hope Troll responded, there was talk that one of Michael's work friends had some kind of a relationship with Lorraine. I think the intruder or intruders knew about the Ramseys' house but didn't know about John Ramsey. The intruder knew that there would be a Bible around where he could circle Psalms 35 and 36, but he didn't know that John isn't Southern. So, a lot of people do believe that Lorraine Lawrence's death is somehow related to a meth ring or drug-related, But those criminal circles might also intersect with criminal circles of burglars and murderers as well. I mean, that's not outlandish. So the question is, did this intersect with some kind of criminal plot or ransom plot against the Ramseys? And just how many people were in the know regarding the plot? If you haven't checked out the previous episode, make sure you check that out, because we go over a lot of information that nobody really goes over, including the floor safe in the basement that nobody wants to talk about, which curiously a fair amount of people knew about. Also, is it too convenient that the stun gun and the high-tech boots were either planted or just so happened to be right next to Helgoth's body? I mean, it's almost as if someone's trying to set him up. Hope Troll also posted this, my working theory. In the ransom letter, multiple times letters are written oddly to make them resemble the following letters: J, S, G, H, and I, or L. Examples: A's are written to look like S's, and when there is a G, he writes the adjacent letters like they are J and S. Specifically, some instances of daughter, money, and percent also seem peculiar. Others mention that he tried to make J's of other letters. I am theorizing that John Stephen Gygax, Helgoth, and Lorraine Lawrence were involved in the original drafting of the ransom letter, and that these strange letters were a way for them to sign the ransom letter. I think Lawrence and Helgoth were vulnerable people. Drugs may have been used to lure them into this crime. Additionally, they may not have realized that the killer was serious about committing this crime. That's an interesting point, too, because if there was some... That's a very interesting point that nobody talks about. Because if in this circle of criminals there's talk of something, and they didn't even think the other parties would go through with it, and then when it actually happened, then they became liabilities, not that they knew and actively participated. Let's not fall for black and white logical fallacies or any kind of logical fallacies here. 1. Patsy might have been the original target. In the ransom letter, if daughter were replaced by wife, the rest of the letter still works. If the conspirators planned the money-motivated kidnap in November, the original target might have been Patsy. That plan might have been abandoned because they didn't know when John would be home. He probably traveled a lot for work. Perhaps, once their focus shifted to Jonbenet, Lorraine let it be known that she would not allow it. That might be why she was killed or why the plan was delayed. For the ransom to succeed, the intruders would have to collect the ransom and get away with the crime. For them to get the money, John would have to be home. Christmas night was the night of the year that John was most likely to be home. Geraldine Vodica Sr., Lorraine's mother, had worked for the Ramseys but was let go in 1995. She may have had a thank you card from Patsy which supplied the intruders with a sample of Patsy's handwriting. The original draft of the ransom letter might have been written to mimic Patsy's handwriting. Another user here mentioned that the percent in the ransom letter is written how some Spanish and Portuguese teachers write it. The early draft of the letter may have been written by a Hispanic woman. Although she may have tried to mimic Patsy's handwriting, she might not have thought to change how she wrote percent. The killer copied and recopied that note to speed up his copying ability. He didn't have to figure out how to mimic Patsy's writing because the draft already did that, but he did have to copy the draft and keep those details while masking his own handwriting. On the third page, after the first few lines, he was no longer copying, and that is why we see more of his natural handwriting. He may have murdered Lorraine to eliminate a connection to the Ramseys, and so he wouldn't have to pay her a share of the ransom. While her suspicious death was being investigated, he would not have attempted this crime. Once the investigation into her death ended, he may have relaunched his money-motivated kidnap plot. I don't think Helgoth was there that night. I think his replacement may have locked himself in a closet. After that, there was only one intruder, and that's when Jonbenet got some scratches in. She may have gone for the eyes and gotten a fragment of his eyeglass frames, unknown metal fragment found under her nail. The killer might have had stun-gunned her and then moved her to the boiler room. In the boiler room, I think the killer stopped garroting Jonbenet to write his initial on her hand. That might have been when she came to. I know it's insane, but the whole thing is insane, and he likes to tag things. The killer may have blamed Helgoth for not being there that night. Since Helgoth served in the army, it is less likely he would have locked himself in a closet. The guy in the closet used his knife to slash the inside. Time passed. He heard Jonbenet scream. Then he heard the metal grate bang down and realized he needed to free himself. So he did. He went looking, saw Jonbenet, tidied her, put her in the wine room, and then threw a blanket over her. He exited through the butler door. That is how he came in. He could not fit through the window grate. He is shorter and stockier. The killer let him in after the killer entered through the window grate. Helgoth's replacement could have gone to the police and lied and said he had no idea what the plan was, but he may have felt shame for messing up the plan. Alternatively, he may have feared the killer. Probably the killer and Helgoth's replacement were there when Helgoth died, otherwise Helgoth might have overpowered one of them. They are both implicated in his murder. Blue Moon Pie mentioned, this Reddit user, mentioned that Frank Sinatra Jr.'s kidnapper selected Frank Jr. for kidnap because he didn't want to abduct a girl. That kidnapper also tried to minimize the trauma for the Sinatras, whereas Jonbenet's killer targeted a little girl and attempted to maximize the Ramsey's trauma. Although I call this my current working theory, really is just an extension of the Smith-Mills-Tracy theory. Interesting. Is this really how it all ties together? An add-on here regarding the Sinatra kidnapping. Afterwards, the abductor lied and said it was a hoax publicity stunt orchestrated by the Sinatras, but some people believed it for decades. If the original plan was to abduct Patsy, mimicking her handwriting in the ransom note was ingenious. If John didn't call the police and paid the ransom and Patsy was returned unharmed a little while later, the only evidence might be that ransom note. The abductor's plan might have been to do the same thing and say that Patsy was in on it and was seeking some notoriety. The person who was smart enough to come up with that plan either wasn't in the house that night or was on meth the night of the murder. Only two options according to this theory. Edit was thinking about the SAS shoe print in the train room wall and the wine room, so I have revised the theory slightly. Once the killer exits, his accomplice, still trapped in the closet, phones a friend. The friend, wearing little black SAS shoes, comes in through the train room window and frees him from the closet. Then they tidy Jonbenet and put her in the wine room. His female helper exits first to the train room window in case the alarm will be set off. He then exits through the butler pantry door because he cannot fit through the window grate. Another interesting follow-up by Hope Troll here. When Jonbenet screamed, her parents couldn't hear that, but he didn't know that. See, this is also interesting. I don't know if enough time is spent talking about this. As far as he knew, her parents were running down the stairs with a gun. Once she is dead, he wants to get out of there as fast as possible. He has just murdered a rich man's daughter. Lou Smith did not believe the DNA was from a factory worker. The DNA in her underwear matched the DNA under her fingernails and the touch DNA on the sides of her pants. It is impossible that it came from a factory worker. Plus, factory workers are Asian women, and the DNA is for a Hispanic or Caucasian male. I actually don't know the source here that the DNA from the underwear matched the DNA profile under the fingernails. Anybody else have a source for that? There's no source listed here. And that's, of course, if it was Jonbenet Ramsey who screamed. Some people believe it was Patsy who screamed, either discovering the body or for another reason. But if it was Jonbenet, the perpetrator would probably assume that everybody in the house would hear her because he didn't know the exact layout and logistics of the audio in the house to hear a scream. So that's an interesting point. So if there was no actual plan to kill her, but then she screamed, and then they panicked and possibly killed her, if the intruder theory has merit. I am not alleging anything is true or untrue. This is Mindshock. Now, the detractors of this theory point to John Kennedy and suspicions that he was just trying to make money by phoning in an acquaintance as a suspect. An interesting post from over 5 years ago now in the Jonbenet subreddit by Sam Candy. This is something I've also pondered about, yet you are the only other person I've come across who has written about being curious about this. I think it is pretty clear it was one of the intruders who was present at Jonbenet's murder who set up Helgoth as the murderer. In my opinion, they knew about the stun gun because they were there when it was used. And in my opinion, they knew about the boot print because it was leaked to them via someone who had close ties to the Boulder Police Department. So here are my timelines. 1. Stun gun. February 4th, 97, Helgoth's suicide, in quotations. BPD crime scene photos taken of his body and room. According to Shapiro, the police crime scene photos show a pair of high-tech climbing boots by his feet and a stun gun beside his hand and a taser in the background. Unknown date, John Kennedy first contacts BPD saying he called 10 to 20 times, but no one called him back. About March 7th, 3 weeks after Helgoth's suicide, Kennedy said he sat down with Boulder detective Jane Harmer, one of the cops investigating Jonbenet's murder. She took my information and never contacted me again, said Kennedy. April 9th, while looking again at autopsy photos, Smith notices unusual marks on body, suspects they were made by a stun gun. 2. Boot print. Fleet White knew about the high-tech boot print in early January 97. The public did not learn about the high-tech boot print until Beckner took charge in November 97, when an investigation into the footwear began. Helen Misserloo posted this. Here's one drawing board doodle, because everything about this murder mystery is half clever and half idiotic, or so dumb it's brilliant. So dumb it's brilliant. That's an interesting way of looking at it. What if it really was suicide out of remorse, fear, accumulated mental problems? He cannot confess, but he still wants to leave some clues, so he just leaves them strewn around him. And perhaps one more. What about not simply BPD leaks or collaboration? What about a textbook police frame-up? Someone on the force who actually wasn't Ramsey's did it, wants to quickly close the case. He either legitimately believes it was Helgoth or thinks it's just too good of an opportunity to pass up. He over-obviously plants or emphasizes key pieces of evidence familiar to the investigation. The shoes, the stun gun, SBTC, the wrench in the works. However, DNA is found, but it doesn't match. Surely in February they had no results, but was it known that they even had DNA? Again, this is from Reddit. Take this with a grain of salt. Supposedly, someone compared Helgoth's high-tech boot, appearing to be the perfect match, same size, and even had a dent or a chip in the sole in the exact same spot the print in the basement does. Huh. That's interesting. If that's true, that is quite interesting. So that would mean Helgoth was involved, or the person who was involved had the shoes to plant there. Now, there's some serious questions about John Kennedy. So let's look at a few different posts regarding John Kennedy. Some of these going all the way back to 2006 on the Web Sleuths forums. Elsewhere, it is being reported that this week's headlines that Jonbenet's killer was at the funeral. It is further reported, I'm assuming this is National Enquirer, it is further reported that John Kennedy turned up at Patsy's funeral, but was turned away by Pam Powell. For those who don't know, John Kennedy is a Boulderite whose friend Michael Helgoth committed suicide, allegedly, on the day after Hunter's address to the killer. Soon there will be no one left but you. Yeah, actually, I went over that previously. It was the day after this press conference. So, again, curious timing. Some people saw the suicide as significant. John Kennedy subsequently broke into the Helgoth home and allegedly stole a pair of high-tech boots, which he took to Team Ramsey as evidence. He also stole a check and some artwork which had nothing to do with Jonbenet's murder, but which may help define his character a little. Helgoth was investigated, but there was nothing to connect him with the Ramsey case. His DNA was not a match, for example. I'm also not certain if the high-techs were ever proven to be Helgoth's. The inability to connect Michael Helgoth to the Ramsey home didn't stop Michael Tracy from making a documentary naming Helgoth as an accessory. John Kennedy was the star of the documentary about the Ramsey case, and he was articulate as he described the bad man, Mr. X, who had been a friend of Helgoth. Tracy's documentary presented Mr. X as investigators' prime suspect, with Helgoth as accessory. The documentary built a case against Mr. X for midnight burglaries, the murder of little Ali Bareilles, of Jonbenet Ramsey's murder then suggested that Mr. X murdered Michael Helgoth and that he later was responsible for the Dance West assault. The documentary claimed that Mr. X had disappeared, adding a flare of intrigue to the theory. Alas, it was a crock of fish. The investigators who started the program were Ramsey PIs and not the official investigators, as viewers may have been forgiven for believing, and Mr. X hadn't disappeared at all. In fact, he had been on probation for 4 years after assaulting his wife and had moved to another state in August prior to Jonbenet's murder. He wasn't in Boulder at the time of the murder, or when Helgoth committed suicide, or when the Dance West assault took place. Again, allegedly. Is all he could find a receipt to prove that? I mean, how did they actually prove that? What's more, it later transpired that Team Ramsey knew he hadn't disappeared. Members of this forum tracked him down from an arrest sheet, which Tracy showed on his documentary, and contacted him via his web business within minutes. Mr. X has an unusual name and was running an internet jewelry business. Mr. X's reaction was one of astonishment and outrage. He was so upset that he immediately contacted the Boulder DA's office and demanded a DNA test to clear himself. He was told by the official investigators that he was not a suspect and never had been. So they never did a DNA test? The whole documentary, as it was shown in the UK, was based upon a lie. What's more, the documentary suggested that Mr. X killed Helgoth to stop him talking about the Ramsey murder. This is despite the fact that the sudden death inquiry decided he was a suicide. Another of Helgoth's friends posted here for a while, and he told us that Helgoth had been depressed about the breakup of a relationship, and that is why he killed himself on Valentine's Day, not because of Hunter's speech. At the time of the documentary, several of us asked whether Kennedy had been investigated. He has a long rap sheet for offenses, including child molestation. One of the other doesn't Gygax also, or some kind of crime against a child? One of the other stars of Tracy's documentary is almost certainly a sex offender who is on the failed to registered list. Such was the quality of his witnesses. There certainly are questions about Kennedy. He apparently tried to contact police 10 plus times to report his suspicions about his dead friend Helgoth. Why not before his death? ? Then he comes up with a pair of high-tech boots which he claims belonged to Helgoth. Was this after it was reported in the media about the high-techs? Was it proven the boots did belong to Helgoth? ? Kennedy told a story about Helgoth boasting about coming into $60,000 soon, half of the ransom amount. We only have Kennedy's word for this. Unfortunately, TV documentaries are made for entertainment, docutainment. They sell better if they tell a good story. Fortunately, after we exposed the Mr. X hoax, exposed what if all of this is unverified? Tracy had to be completely revamp his documentary before it could be shown in the U.S., and we never heard any more from the John San Augustine Ramsey investigator who wanted lots of money to find the mysteriously disappeared Mr. X. So if it's true, why did John Kennedy turn up at Patsy's funeral? And if that's true, why did Aunt Pam turn him away? If it's true, will he be angered by the rejection? If it's true, will he change his story? And did John Kennedy just want the reward amount or something? And he thought people would buy the fact that he was pushing this theory, even if he knew it wasn't true? Either way, Kennedy seems shady as well. Everybody seems shady here, so it's kind of impossible to make heads or tails. Also, apparently in this post by Misty from May 14th, 2004 on WebSleuth, is stating that John Kennedy has an extensive criminal history and has permanent damage from a head injury from a car accident. What does everybody make of that, if that's true? But seemingly, both Kennedy and Gygax have a history of crimes against children and other crimes. Allegedly. Again, everything is alleged here. This is Mindshock. I'm not claiming anything is true or untrue. These are just claims and information that have been presented that we are logically analyzing. A post from CC here. It's difficult to tell what Kennedy is in this for, but I suspect the reward. He seems to be a career 2-bit criminal, and we can only expect his associations would be with same type of cons. This suggests Helgoth was one as well. The sexual offense doesn't read, in my opinion, as a child victim. It was 1979. He was 26 and was likely having a fling with a 17-year-old girl. The rest, since he spent more time out of jail than in, suggests he was into petty crap. There is doubt cast on whether or not Helgoth committed suicide, which would in some remote way suggest he was murdered because he was getting sloppy with drugs and ready to talk. If he was murdered, it would seem illogical that he knew the murderer. Perhaps his little group should be thoroughly investigated and the killer be found among them. I mean, that's a great post there, because obviously Helgoth could have been murdered, and it has nothing to do with Jonbenet Ramsey. If it wasn't a suicide and he was murdered and staged as a suicide, it could have been for a different reason by other parties. And then you have a guy like Kennedy who's just trying to get reward money, possibly having a permanent brain injury of some kind. I mean, here's a totally bizarre article here from October 25th, 2000. Rocky Mountain News. Purported Ramsey investigator accused of burglary. Lafayette man charged with entering house to snatch pair of boots. Boulder. The man who provides the parents of Jonbenet Ramsey with purported evidence in their daughter's death has been arrested on burglary charges. John Edward Kennedy, 47, told officers who arrested him that he was investigating the Ramsey case. Kennedy of Lafayette last summer provided detectives working for John and Patsy Ramsey with a pair of boots he believed may have left a partial print inside the family's home, possibly by the killer. Police do not believe the boots are connected to the Ramsey case, but sent them to the Colorado Bureau of Investigation for examination. Was that the last time anybody ever heard of them? Police Chief Mark Beckner said the boots belonged to a former resident of the house Kennedy is accused of burglarizing October 10th. Kennedy, when arrested, said Boulder police had authorized him to break into the home. Boulder detectives denied the claim. And if they did approve it, would they deny it after the fact? Kennedy also said he feared evidence would be lost because the house was supposed to be demolished. Police suspect Kennedy of kicking in a rear door to the home and taking with him 3 drafting quality drawings, a $54,000 check, and legal papers including a deed of trust. What? Who leaves a $54,000 check around? Diamond jewelry, several watches, and money in one bedroom were untouched, according to police reports. The home is owned by the family of a deceased man whom the Ramsey investigators have said may have been involved with the beating and strangulation of their daughter. I mean, this is just one of the most bizarre cases in history. I mean, it's just... There's so many rabbit holes, so many potential suspects and POIs. I mean, it just never ends here. And it seems like basically nobody's credible. Let's also not forget the party supposedly only a few houses away that night, including known drug dealers that J.T. Colfax brought forward from his jailhouse stories. Is it possible that Gygax or Kennedy or Helgoth were somehow connected to individuals at that party? I mean, there's a lot of criminals around there, so it's really crazy. So what does everybody make of Gygax, Helgoth, and Kennedy in this bizarre circle? And is it possible they were also connected to other individuals who may or may not have been responsible for whatever happened to Jonbenet Ramsey? I mean, was this also possibly some kind of burglary gone wrong? Maybe they thought the Ramseys weren't coming back? I mean, it's tough, too, because if they are a bunch of drug users that were at least partially out of their mind, I mean, it's really, really difficult to nail down any of these theories definitively and definitively rule any of them out without having more information, but it seems kind of weird to just write them all off completely when there are just so many coincidences lining up here. Not necessarily that they committed the crime, but that there may have been some kind of a plot, and it may have somehow connected in some way to what actually happened that night. Really weird, but believe it or not, we have way more suspects to discuss, alleged suspects anyhow, and way more rabbit holes to go down. I mean, this is truly a very, very unique case. I mean, extremely tragic, but also unique as well. There's not a lot of cases like this with this many different theories, suspects, rabbit holes, and coincidences. So that's it for now. Hope everybody found another edition of Mindshock True Crime interesting and informative. If you want to help support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. You can also be a YouTube member right here on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, like and share, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Questions, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.